Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast.
Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. B10 Media Days is in the books. Practice begins next Wednesday, and the biggest recruiting event of the year is coming up this weekend, the barbecue at the Big House. Joining us this week to discuss that and more is beat writer Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine Magazine. It's hard to believe, but next Wednesday, Jim Harbaugh and his team will have their first practice of the season. Before you know it, it will be September 3rd, and Colorado State will be here, and we will be teeing it up to start another season. It's been a wild and wacky offseason, as we all know. It's time to put that all behind us now and focus on the fast-approaching season. My guest today says at B10 Media Days this week, Jim Harbaugh seemed relaxed, confident, and upbeat. He's ready for the season, and as he said, the goals are clear. Beat Michigan State and Ohio State in the same year. Win the Big Ten and the national championship. Up next with his thoughts on B10 Media Days and much more is beat writer Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine Magazine. So stay with us. Here with us on our game day segment this week as we wrap it up for July and get ready for preview month, August, is Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine. Great to have you back with us, Clayton.
Great to be back. Football is near.
Exactly. And as you and I were discussing before we hit the record button, you were in Indianapolis at B10 Media Days this week, just got back last night. We're recording on Thursday morning. It might not be the official start to college football season, but for those of us who cover the program, and I suppose a lot of fans, it sure feels like it, doesn't it?
It does. It's definitely the unofficial kickoff of the season. And also, as we were talking before we recorded it, want to enjoy these last few weekends here before things get going. But when you see Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan players and Ryan Day, the Ohio State players, all the coaches and players that were brought down to Indianapolis for B10 Media Days, you can start to feel it a little bit. They're talking about their teams. Everybody's excited. Everybody's undefeated at this point in the season. So you get that excitement from each and every team. And then you start thinking about the games. And I think there's a week 0 game between in Ireland, right? Between Northwestern and Nebraska. So you start thinking about the matchups and getting excited about that, what you're going to be doing in a few weeks, watching games on TV or tailgating before a Michigan game and things like that. So it feels closer and closer. Camp starts August 3rd, which is next Wednesday. And then they go from there. And that's where the team is forged, as Jim Harbaugh says. So super exciting.
Oh, absolutely. And I watched just about every head coach and every player that came with their respective teams speak to the media. Just fascinating to watch. But let's talk about Jim Harbaugh for a moment, Clayton. I mean, last year he seemed really edgy when talking about the team. It was really different. But this year, when he spoke, I think it was on Tuesday, he really seemed very kicked back and relaxed, didn't he?
Yeah, it was. I wrote a column before we went down there for Media Days, how this is going to be a different Jim Harbaugh because he's never gone to this event. He's never had an off season. He's never had a preseason as the reigning Big Ten champion. It's always been kind of, good teams that fizzle out at the end of the year, as we know, Ohio State, and then the bowl streak of not being able to win a bowl game since his first season. But this is different. They're coming in as kind of the team that people are looking at. All the guys talked about a target they have on their back. But you're right. Harbaugh last year, I thought everyone was talking about how energized he was and how it seemed like, he was going to turn things around or die trying. Now, not many believed him, but this year he was just talking about how well the offseason has gone. He talked about the one day where he interviewed for the Vikings job, and that was the only really rocky day of the entire thing. He loves this team. That was kind of the number one takeaway, and every coach is going to say that. But with Harbaugh and some of these other guys that talk, you kind of got to read how they're saying it too. That's one of the biggest things, and you can tell. And even the evidence there is Eric All was talking about how Harbaugh actually canceled a recent player-led practice because he thought they were working too hard, and he wanted to pull them back a little bit, give them a little bit of rest before fall camp starts. So I think he likes guys like that that he wants to pull back as opposed to talk them into things, and he talked about that as well. in terms of how he kind of was up there and what his energy was like, he definitely was the reigning Big Ten champion. He was the AP Coach of the Year. You could tell he cracked a few jokes during his hour-long session. He even had the no comment heard around the world about the Ryan Day third base quote back in November. He said he wouldn't comment on who that was about, which is basically a yes, that is about Ryan Day. But then he even took a shot at a local reporter at one point. Nothing crazy, but just kind of a little jab, and he was definitely feeling himself. But you kind of feel like that confident, maybe little slightly less than cocky Jim Harbaugh is back, and it was fun to watch. I mean, we were cracking up a little bit. The local reporters, when you'd get asked a question by some of the national or out of town reporters who don't quite know exactly how to craft those questions just yet with him, and then you get kind of a funny response. So it was very, very interesting to hear what he had to say. One thing, but the second thing is how he was saying it and kind of his demeanor there, and I thought he was really confident.
He was, as always, interesting trying to read in between the lines when you're listening to Coach Harbaugh. It takes some work. One of the questions I get, and a lot of fans were hoping that he would talk more about it at Media Days, was the battle between Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy. And, it was Big Ten Media Days. We're not going to get much from that, are we?
No. I've talked to people about that over the last 48 hours, and they said, oh, yeah, not much of an update on the quarterbacks. And I was thinking, well, really not much has happened. I mean, he talked to the media at a satellite camp in June, and he basically gave the same comments then as he did on Tuesday, that the best player is going to play. How do you find out who the best player is? He plays the best. And really, we've just been waiting for fall camp next Wednesday for that to unfold. J.J. McCarthy has been banged up. He says he's pretty much 100% now, from what he's been saying on the team trip around the state of Michigan. So that's huge, and that means that this battle will be there. But basically what Harbaugh said about the quarterback battle is, Cade McNamara is going in as the starter. He's going to take the number one snaps on August 3rd, and J.J. McCarthy can beat him out, but he's going to be tough to beat out. And he said Cade McNamara, it'll be tough for him to beat J.J. McCarthy out. So that's kind of basically a sentence that means nothing. But at the same time, I think it's important and interesting that he's leaving this thing, pretty wide open. Now, I will say this, and I wrote about this morning, did a 22 takeaways from 2022 Big Ten Media Days, and one of them is just the way he's kind of handling this thing. I think we all can look back at 2017, the battle between Wilton Speight and John O'Korn, and learn that maybe the approach of having a returning starter in Wilton Speight and making him, basically taking him off that pedestal as a starter and saying, hey, you're going to have to earn this back. Not saying that the Cade's not going to have to earn this thing, but I think he's being a little more careful with taking things, that job away from him. He says he's the number one guy. He still has to earn it. But, I think the messaging there is a little different. And talking to Cade McNamara for about a half an hour, being at his podium, he seems confident. He said this is his team. This is, from a leadership standpoint, but he just wants to win. And he feels like that's what the whole quarterback room's vibe is as well. That includes J.J. McCarthy. So it'll be a competitive battle, I think. But, I think Cade McNamara is the type of guy that's going to keep it cordial. And he spoke about that as well. And that's going to be big because he is a leader on this team. And even if he doesn't win the job, he's got to stay up and he's got to, still contribute to the team. So not a huge update on the quarterbacks, but I thought there were some interesting things. Again, as you put it perfectly, reading between the lines is kind of a lot of the job at this point, especially in the off season. So I thought we were able to do that just a little bit.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting listening to what Cade McNamara has to say. He is a leader. He's a very well-spoken young man. That's why Jim brought him to Media Days. He represents the team extremely well and himself. But, he should be confident it's his job to lose. He quarterbacked the Big Ten championship team and a team to the playoffs. That says a lot, doesn't it?
It does. And, you can tell that he, feels that way, that, he said at one point that I think I've proven in the past that I can help this team win, and he absolutely has, as you mentioned. 12-2 record last season. He played well in some of those big games. I know he had a lot of help from the run game, and he had a lot of help from the defense, but he played good football. Jim Harbaugh was touting the stat that over 50% of Cade McNamara's drives ended up in points last season, and really that's the number one thing that they measure when they look at a quarterback. He said J.J. McCarthy's number was up there as well, but a little harder to measure because he was coming in for a couple plays at a time or one play at a time. But you're right. And then the other takeaway from Cade McNamara and his confidence is that he's not just resting on that. I mean, he said he got to work a week or two after the season ended down in Miami, with that loss to Georgia. He was during spring break, definitely don't blame anyone for getting some rest there or going out and taking a vacation. He was out in California working with Jordan Palmer, his quarterback's coach, or his quarterback's trainer, and just getting back to work. He said his footwork has gotten a lot better. He said his accuracy has improved. And interesting nugget on that with Jordan Palmer, who's Carson Palmer's brother. He trains Josh Allen, a lot of other NFL quarterbacks, and Josh Allen has credited him for really, bringing up that completion percentage from his rookie year, which was not very high. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but he has helped guys get more accurate, which is, as most quarterbacks say, the hardest thing to do. Cade came in last year, was pretty accurate, 64.2%, but I think we could see that go up this year. But the point is, he's improving too. Cade McNamara is going to get better too. I'm not ruling out J.J. McCarthy, and I love that kid and what he brings to the table, but Cade McNamara is, only 21 years old or something like that. He's getting better himself, and I think he knows that he can't just sit back and rest on what happened last season. He has to be an even better quarterback this year.
Oh, absolutely. You can tell he does know that. And we're going to have plenty of time to watch how that develops, as you mentioned. Practice starts next week on the 3rd of August. We will hear about the battle at quarterback every day. A lot of interesting discussions this past week, or these 2 days of Big Ten Media Days. And you mentioned you wrote a piece with 22 takeaways that stood out to you during the Big Ten Media Days. Talk about some of those that were up there.
Yeah, so first of all, I've backed myself into a corner because if I'm doing this in 20 years and I got to write 42 takeaways, I think that's going to be a tough task. But, we already hit on a few, but I think one of the top ones I had was, how in the past, and let's go back to Jim Harbaugh's introductory press conference, December 30th, 2014, people asked what the goals were, what the expectations were, and he just said, we have great expectations. We're going to have great expectations for the first team meeting, all that stuff. He wouldn't put a number on anything. He wouldn't talk about any championships. Remember Brady Hoke always talking about the Big Ten championship. But now that, and this started a little bit last season where Harbaugh was just, we're going to be a little more transparent. You could tell that was going to be kind of his, his MO. And, it was interesting. Someone asked about his goals, and flat out, he said, our goals are to beat Ohio State and Michigan State in the same year, win the Big Ten championship, and win the national championship. Those are the 4 goals. And I think people like to hear that about Michigan State. Obviously, they haven't beaten them since 2019. The 2 losses last year, controversial and very heartbreaking in East Lansing, and then the year before, the COVID thing in an empty big house. But people are excited to hear that, I think. And, my takeaway from that was just he's throwing those goals out there. And I think that speaks to the team he has, that he feels like they can handle that as well. A lot of guys talked about the emphasis on Michigan State as well. They might start a drill that is dedicated to Michigan State, similar to their 9-on-7 drill that they've coined the Beat Ohio drill. So I thought that was interesting as well. And this next one also speaks to the confidence I think that Harbaugh was speaking with. We all saw the comments that Ryan Day told Ohio State boosters they need $13 million of NIL money to keep the roster intact. And Harbaugh was asked about that from a Columbus reporter, and he said, let's double that at Michigan. I think we can double that. And he said, also brought up, first one to bring it up, and I know he's been cutting edge on some of these issues in college athletics in the past, but that players should sign an NIL deal with the Big Ten to get some of the TV revenue. And I bet the Big Ten people were like, hey, shut up, Jim. We don't want to spread around that money. But I thought that was interesting, and I don't know if that's possible, but I think it's, he said he wants players to get paid directly and get a piece of the pie. I don't think many people are talking about that at this point, but I think fans were excited to hear that as well about the NIL, because they've been frustrated with some of the transformational, not transactional type of comments from Jim Harbaugh over the last couple months. But I think when he was given the opportunity to elaborate here, he really showed that he is for that. He wants his players to make money, and it's going to help in recruiting as well, obviously. The last thing that stands out now, since I have the floor at this point, is just the freshman that Jim Harbaugh alluded to that is a gift from the football gods. He said he wouldn't say who, so he wouldn't say who it was. You can kind of deduce, though, that from his conversation with Bruce Feldman, he talked about Kenneth Grant, who enrolled in the summer, the defensive tackle, weighs 349 pounds and clocked a sub-5 40-yard dash, which is just crazy. He'll probably be on that Bruce Feldman freaks list when it comes out in a couple of weeks. I think Kenneth Grant is an underrated recruit that they were able to bring in. They got out of Merrillville, Indiana, and maybe he could play right away. But I think he really likes this class that is coming in and the last couple classes that they brought in. But I thought that was worth noting as well, that they have a freak in the making. Probably Kenneth Grant, I assume he was referring to with that.
A lot of discussion about NIL expansion in the last 2 days at Big Ten Media Days. And I thought it was interesting to hear Commissioner Warren talking about UCLA and USC joining the conference, and the fact that the Big Ten is open, as he said, to expanding beyond 16 teams. How many? He didn't really mention that number, but I'm quite sure it isn't over yet, is it, Clayton?
No, it's not. And it's funny. He said that and, said that they're not going to rush any expansion. And then I think later that day, Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports comes out with a report that the Big Ten is now eyeing Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and Cal to join. So that'd be 6 West Coast teams. And Dennis, saw him around the other day. He was down there probably gathering intel for that very report throughout the last couple of days. And that's interesting. I mean, me, from a personal standpoint, not that anyone cares what I believe, but, kind of don't love it. But at the same time, things are moving this way. And once last year, about a year ago to the day almost, that Texas and Oklahoma announced that they were joining the SEC in a couple of years, that's when stuff got real, where then it's all about money now and it's all about TV contracts. Again, I don't love it, but this is the way things are going. It doesn't surprise me. I think the Big Ten is going to get to 20 teams, and if those are the 4, could be worse, I guess. Notre Dame obviously is a team that they're going to watch closely, and if they decide to re-up with NBC themselves and stay independent, or whether they're going to join a conference, nobody knows at this point. But I think that would be one domino to fall, their decision. And then if not, we could see some more West Coast teams in here, and the scheduling gets interesting with pods and things like that. So there's a lot to look out for on the horizon in college football.
Something else Commissioner Warren mentioned was that he was 100%, he said, in favor of expanding the playoffs. And he really didn't get into, at least I didn't hear him get into numbers on how many teams he would like to see in the playoffs. But I think it's clear with him even saying that the Big Ten is going to be at the forefront in helping shape how many teams are in the playoff, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think the Big Ten is going to have a seat at the table no matter what. It's kind of funny, I was saying this when all this stuff was going down, a month ago, that, man, we can hate this thing or love it, the fact that the conferences are kind of going away to an extent, traditionally. But if you're a Michigan fan, you should have a sense of comfort in you're in the conference that's taking other teams. You're in the conference that is building a quote-unquote super conference, and you're not in one of the ones where all the teams are going away and they're joining. Now, Michigan has a big enough brand where I think they'd be fine no matter what, but you take some comfort in the fact that you're in the Big Ten right now. When you look at the realignment, it's going to be really interesting to see. But when it comes to college football expansion, I think it's got to happen. I think it's long overdue, and I think it probably will happen when there's this much money at stake, and that's kind of where things are going. Then I think we're going to see it probably at 8 or 16 at some point, and that makes it interesting for a team like Notre Dame to do the super conference and say, hey, you either join one or you're going to be left out. That would force their hand, of course, and that would make things really interesting. But I think we'll probably see that as once the dust settles on who's going to be where in what conference, then we're going to see the playoff expand, in my opinion.
Well, one of the other discussion points or topics, Clayton, which you have to expect this year, is NIL, and there was a lot of that chatter at Big Ten Media Days. And to a lot of the fans, a lot of them I talk to anyway, they're confused with NIL from what they read and see in the media. It is a big gray area, and I know it changes or is different from state to state. Jim thinks the Big Ten can claim a leadership role, he mentioned, in NIL. I sort of fall in line with what I heard Coach Ferentz say. He says, hey, there are no rules when it comes to NIL, if we're being honest. And I think his concerns are shared by really probably the majority in college football, aren't they?
Yeah, and you heard Lane Kiffin talking about it last week at SEC Media Days. and some other coaches throughout the country. Now, the SEC, I don't think many of those teams played by the rules as they were. Now there are new rules, and there are rules, but it doesn't seem like anything's being enforced. So I think people are kind of using NIL as an excuse to use PFP, pay for play, and you're seeing that with recruiting inducements. And I respect Michigan's stance on that, not wanting to get into that, but at the same time, you have to keep up. You don't want to go away in terms of being a national power, or, especially when it comes to recruiting, because that's obviously the lifeblood of a college football program. So Michigan's getting organized from their standpoint. You hear things about the Champions Collective, which was started by Valiant Management and a group of boosters that are trying their best to get the current players paid, and then you get the proof out to the recruits. That's kind of the way to do it, and that's the formula. And that's why I think a lot of people, when NIL was passed, thought that Michigan was going to benefit from that in recruiting. I still think they will, but they're playing a longer game, and that has people worried right now, which is natural, because uncertainty is kind of scary at times, especially when it comes to a program that so many people love. So it's really, really interesting. And obviously we know that, as you said, the state laws are different everywhere. A lot of coaches talked about how they need federal regulation. Kevin Warren talked about that as well. I think most people agree on that. And then, there's also the fact that different programs run their programs differently. And the South and places like Ohio State that are football factories, to be completely honest, are going to operate differently than Michigan or Northwestern or Iowa, as you mentioned with Kirk Ferentz. So that makes it so uneven in terms of what's going on. Nobody knows exactly what they can and can't do. And a lot of programs have taken the liberty there to say, well, nobody knows what we can't do, so let's just do basically whatever we want. And it's gotten quite messy, as you know, with, you hear some of these stories about kids that are leaning one way and go the other way. So I think a lot of coaches want this thing to get cleaned up, but I don't think anyone really knows exactly how that's going to happen.
No, I don't think they do either. There's a lot of discussion out there about it, and a lot of concern from Michigan fans. We talked about, or you mentioned recruiting. After coming off a Big Ten championship year, a playoff year, our fan base thought, "Hey, this is it, man. Now we're gonna compete on a recruiting level starting this year." I think most fans thought that with the Ohio States of the Big Ten, but that hasn't happened. There's a lot of angst out there right now surrounding this class of 23. Are you surprised at how slow it's coming together?
I would say so. I mean, if you were to ask me, after the Big Ten championship game last year, or, even after signing day later that month, where this class would be ranked or how it would do, I would say, it would probably be pretty good. They're ranked 24th right now on the On3 consensus rankings. It's gotten better over the last few weeks. Credit Mike Elston for his defensive line recruiting for a good chunk of that. But, I think it's going to probably improve here through the stretch, the home stretch, and throughout the season. We saw Michigan finish really well last year with all the winning that they did on the field. But you're right, it's gotten tougher. And I think there are two factors basically at play, is that you had a 6-week stretch in January and into February that Jim Harbaugh was, not shooting down any NFL rumors. In fact, the reason for that is because he was very interested and wanted the Vikings job, went and interviewed for them. That's going to stall recruiting no matter how you spin it. And I think, he would probably say it was worth it because he was doing what he wanted. But at the same time, that's just the reality of it. Now, the second thing I think is NIL, something we've talked about where, there are teams out there that are, not playing by the quote unquote rules that are not being enforced. And, I don't think Michigan's been willing to go into those waters yet. That's why I think, figuring out their exact NIL plan, getting the current players paid as much as they possibly can through the legal channels, is going to benefit them on the recruiting trail. And the speed of that is going to determine, just how well they can finish in this class. And it'll be fascinating to see, but win on the field. And I think you're going to be able to get some of the kids that you want. And, they still got about half the class to fill. So there's a long ways to go too.
The one thing, or the two names that just sort of drive people over the edge in this in this cycle and in next year's cycle, is that you lost Dante Moore, a Detroit quarterback from King, and then C.J. Carr. Most people thought, yeah, he'll end up here, as Grandpa Lloyd Carr said. I just assumed he would be at Michigan too, but that was shocking to a lot of Michigan fans. Do you think that Michigan and Jim are still going to recruit Dante Moore, though?
I would assume so. I think that that's kind of been their style since I've started covering the team, where you see a guy go and commit somewhere else, but they're just going to continue to try to build that relationship and stay in touch. And you never know what can happen. You never know what Oregon's going to do this season. Michigan could have another outstanding season, and Dante Moore could say, "Hey, I want to stay home," and things are more simple. At the same time, I think with some of the NIL stuff, it's going to be harder to flip kids when they've agreed to things, or I'm not saying that's necessarily the case in Dante Moore's situation, or not, but that's something to watch too. How hard is it going to be to flip a kid? CJ Carr was a blow as well, not as big as Dante Moore in my opinion, but perception-wise, as you said, it doesn't look good that Lloyd Carr's grandson is going to Notre Dame, but 2024 quarterback recruiting isn't over, as we know. Actually, this weekend with the barbecue at the Big House, their biggest unofficial visit weekend of the summer, Jaden Davis, an elite quarterback in 2024, is set to come in. And our EJ Holland, our recruiting guru, basically has logged a prediction for Michigan to land him coming into this visit. They're going to personalize it for him. Jim Harbaugh and Matt Weiss, those guys are going to spend a lot of time with him this weekend. And there's a lot of buzz about, how he wants to join this class. It'd be the 2024 class. So that's something to watch as well. I think they can still do well there. But you're right. I mean, it's disappointing at the quarterback spot that you've gone. J.J. McCarthy was in 2021 already. They didn't get an elite guy in 2022. They got a couple intriguing prospects. 2023 looks like you swing and miss at basically your only target in Dante Moore. And then 24 started with C.J. Carr going to Notre Dame. But you can still, there's a lot of time here, and it looks like Michigan is trending for Jaden Davis right now, number 13 player in the country. So that would be a coup for Michigan, and I think it would kind of relieve a lot of people that are worried about that position going forward.
Well, final question for you, Clayton, before we let you get away. This is such an exciting time of the year, as we talked about at the top of the interview. When Big 10 Media Days unfolds, it's unofficially the start of football season for most of us. Practice gets underway next week, so the previews are going to be rolling in magazines, media, and we'll be sick of them in a couple of weeks and be ready to tee it up, I should say. Last season was such a joy ride for Michigan fans. We had been waiting for that kind of a season for a long time. Do you see a repeat as a possibility this year?
I think it's definitely a possibility. I don't have that predicted. I do have Michigan losing to Ohio State at the end of the season and Ohio State winning the Big Ten championship. But that's not to say Michigan can't win it either. I mean, when you look at what Michigan has coming back on the offensive side of the ball with two quarterbacks that are capable and that are probably going to be better than last season, you have Ronnie Bell coming back off an injury. Basically, every pass catcher is back. You lose Hassan Haskins, but you have Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. The defense is a question mark, especially the front seven, losing Hutchinson and Ojabo, but Harbaugh says they have a no-star defense, and he feels like it could be even better than last season. That remains to be seen. It didn't surprise me he said that, but at the same time, we need to see that play out. Michigan has a ton of talent on that team. I really like this coaching staff and what he was able to put together starting last year when he made all those changes. There's no question that the schedule sets up pretty nicely. I was talking to Phil Steele a couple weeks ago, and he said if they win that Iowa game on October 1st, he thinks they're undefeated heading down to Columbus. You never know what can happen in a game like that. It's not going to be easy to win, but I don't think they're asking for that. They just need one Saturday afternoon again, and we'll see what happens. But I think a repeat is definitely a possibility. This team could be right back there at the Big Ten championship next season. Ohio State has a lot coming back too. That scares me a little bit. And you still got to win all the other games too. There's only been, they haven't done that. They haven't gone into Ohio State 11-0 under Harbaugh. So I think they have a good shot, but at the same time, probably wouldn't pick that. In fact, I haven't picked that, but they're right there. They're picked second by the media in the Big Ten poll. So it shows you just, they're not picked to win it again, but, they got that potential to get there.
Well, as we mentioned, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be starting the previews, and we can't wait, and just about a month away from teeing it up. So it is going to be fun, and let's get it here. That's the way I'm sort of looking at it. Here with us on a program this week on our Game Day segment has been Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine. Clayton, always a pleasure having you on the show. You're very generous with your time, and we look forward to getting you back during the season and talking Michigan football.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine Magazine for joining us today. Our next show will signal our return to weekly programming as we get ready for another great season of Michigan football. In August, we'll spend most of our time previewing this year's team, watching position battles from week to week, sharing any injury news we learn, and we know we never get much of that, and we will have much, much more. So we'll be back on August 10th with our next show. So until then, enjoy what's left of summer and join me back here on August 10th for the latest news and chatter on Michigan football. That will do it for July. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue.
Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!